All right. Well, I hope everyone's having a really great day wherever you are. Hope the weather is cooperating. Again, we've got a lot of people joining, and I know we've got a lot of great content. So I want to go ahead and officially kick us off so we have enough time for all of the information we're going to be sharing. So formally, good afternoon to you all, and welcome to this webinar today. Titled Access to Housing, Disaster Relief, and Homelessness Assistance Programs for Immigrants. My name is Anthony Salas. I am the Senior Manager of Events and Membership with Welcoming America. And again, it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers here in just a bit, and also to welcome all of you to this really important discussion today. Before we get started, just a quick overview for any of you that maybe are not familiar with our organization, Welcoming America. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that believes that all people, including immigrants, are valued contributors and are vital to the success of communities and a shared future. We have a welcoming network that's made up of nearly 300 local governments and nonprofits that are doing amazing work that really creates environments where everyone feels like they can thrive and belong. If you want to learn more about our organization, I invite you to go to welcomingamerica.org. And some of the usual items here, just some quick housekeeping things. The chat feature that you're already using in terms of letting us know where you are, keep that available. So if you've got any questions that might be technical related, need some help with anything, you can enter it there. But also any content related questions as we get going, you can enter in that area as well. We are recording the webinar, and it will be made available to you along with some additional resources that our speakers will be referencing a little later. You'll see all of that coming to you in an email here in the next coming few days. We'll get that out as soon as possible. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our speakers joining us today. We are being joined by Kate Walz, who is the Senior Attorney with the National Housing Law Project. Wafa Dinaro, who is the Director of Economic Development with Wayne County, Michigan. And Viviana Meza, who is the Deputy Director of Economic Development, also with Wayne County, Michigan. And again, I'm very excited that they all have taken the time to join us here today. I know they've got a lot of great info to share. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kate, who's going to start us off.
Thank you, Anthony. I'm so happy to be joining you all today. As Anthony said, my name is Kate Walz. I'm a senior attorney at the National Housing Law Project, which is a national nonprofit based in California, also with an office in Washington, D.C., and I work remotely from Chicago, Illinois. So I'm going to be talking to you today about access to housing, disaster relief, and homelessness assistance programs for immigrants, and what you need to know, especially as I think you all know, there's been quite a changing landscape on this issue over the last couple of years. As a starting point, I am, at the end of the day, a housing lawyer and civil rights attorney. I am not an immigration law expert, though I work at this intersection, but I will not be able to answer sort of detailed immigration law specific issues that you may have, but I can suggest organizations to speak with. Next slide, please. So what we'll be talking about today, first, when you look at the intersection of immigration, housing, disaster relief, and homeless assistance, it varies by program and source of funding if there are immigration requirements. Some programs' immigration implications are subject to interpretation by the administering federal agency, and some programs and funds impose no immigration restrictions, and state and local governments in those cases are not free to impose their own restrictions on those federal dollars. And as I noted, this is an evolving situation given the change in presidential administration. Next slide, please. So first, we're going to talk about the public charge rule. Next slide, please. First, the question is, who is subject to public charge? It's important to have this discussion first because I think there's been a lot of confusion that's led to a lot of immigrants fearing that they may be deemed a public charge when in fact they would not be subject to the public charge rule to begin with. And there's some data to show that there's been a chilling effect on immigrants who are not subject to the public charge rule in that they are not applying for benefits or emergency assistance that they may be eligible for. So who is subject to public charge? Only non-citizens seeking either admission to the United States or an adjustment of status to lawful permanent resident. Next slide, please. Who is not subject to public charge? So the following categories of non-citizens are not subject to a public charge determination. That includes LPRs applying for US citizenship, refugees and asylees, VAWA self-petitioners, survivors of domestic violence, trafficking, and other serious crimes, special immigrant juveniles, certain parolees, and several other categories of sorry, that's cutting off. Next slide, please. So under the public charge rule in place since 1999, a public charge is defined as a person who is primarily dependent on the government for subsistence, as shown by either the receipt of public cash assistance, such as TANF or SSI, or institutionalization for long-term care at the government's expense. Now, under the 2019 rule that was advanced by the Trump administration, the public charge rule definition changed, and it included any applicant who receives one or more public benefit for more than 12 months within a 36-month period. It also included for the first time specific benefits that would be subject to a public charge determination. This included non-cash benefits such as public housing, Section 8 or tenant-based vouchers or housing choice vouchers, as they're often called, SNAP, Medicaid, long-term institutionalization, and cash assistance. There was also what's called a totality of the circumstances test, which was a prospective determination looking to see if in the future the person would be reliant upon these certain public benefits and would be considered a public charge as a result. Next slide, please. There have been a variety of updates on the public charge matter in the United States. First, after President Biden was sworn in, shortly after that, the Department of Justice dropped various appeals to several lawsuits that had successfully challenged the public charge rule. The effect of that is it left in place a ruling out of Chicago in the Northern District of Illinois, where my office is one of the counsel, that vacated that 2019 public charge rule nationwide. In March of 2021, the Department of Homeland Security formally removed the 2019 public charge rule from the Federal Register. So what does that mean? That means that the rule that included non-cash assistance and this future-looking determination that a person might be a public charge is no longer in effect. What is currently in effect is the 1999 interim field guidance. That remains the current law as to public charge. That means only public cash assistance, such as TANF or SSI, or long-term institutionalization at the government's expense. And DHS has made clear in several memos that are on its website that this does not include any form of COVID-19 relief, such as rental assistance. I'll send you a memo at the end too that further outlines DHS's efforts to make sure that people are not chilled from using other benefits. Next slide, please. DHS issued what's called an advance notice of proposed rulemaking on what they would be considering for the next iteration of public charge. These comments were due on October 22nd, 2021. If you'd like information on that process or you would like to follow updates as it goes into formal rulemaking, you can go to the Keep Families Together website that is run by the National Housing Law Project and the National Low Income Housing Coalition. You can also go to the National Immigrant Law Center's website, Protecting Immigrant Families, and they also provide updates on the public charge rule and the future rulemaking. It's critically important that benefits counted under public charge be limited to those that mean a person has become primarily and permanently reliant on the federal government to avoid destitution. So this is the type of definition advocates would like to see. So again, families who need public assistance are not deterred from receiving it, regardless of their immigration status. And as I noted, there is a new Department of Homeland Security memo that is advising on ensuring that people are not chilled from using other needed public benefits or from state and local resources for that same reason. Next slide, please. Now we're going to talk about the other housing, emergency, and homelessness assistance programs and if there are any immigration restrictions on those programs. Next slide, please. So these programs may be subject to two federal laws that provide the main limitations on federal housing, emergency, and homelessness assistance programs. This is Title IV of the Personal Responsibility Work, Opportunity, and Reconciliation Act and Section 214 of the Housing and Community Development Act. There are variations by program and type of assistance if individuals must have what's called qualified immigration status, or if they can receive the support regardless of their status, or can receive aid if meeting certain exemptions. Next slide, please. So first, talking about Section 214 of the Housing and Community Development Act. Section 214 limits eligibility to qualified immigrants in the following housing programs. So this is an explicit and exclusive list. If you're not on the list, you are not subject to 214. If you are on the list, you are subject to 214. So programs that are subject to 214 and therefore have immigration requirements include public housing, project-based Section 8, Section 8 vouchers, Section 236, HODAG, rent supplement, Section 23 leased housing assistance, and Section 235 homeownership. Section 214 does not apply to the Section 202 or 811 programs, the 221D3 below market interest rate program, the Rural 515 program or 538 multifamily loan program, the HOPWA program, CDBG, the low income housing tax credit program, or the McKinney-Vento programs. Next slide, please. So what is a qualified immigrant under Section 214? It's a US citizen, a lawful permanent resident, refugees and asylees, parolees, persons granted withholding of removal or deportations, persons qualified under the Immigration Reform and Control Act, and qualified victims of trafficking. Next slide, please. T visa holders are not explicitly listed among Section 214's categories of eligible immigrants. However, as qualified victims of trafficking, they may still be eligible for HUD subsidized housing. This is because persons who have made a bona fide application for a T visa are eligible for federal benefits, including subsidized housing, to the same extent as refugees who are an eligible explicit category under Section 214. U visa holders are not an eligible category, but it can be explored if a U visa holder may be able to secure or apply for a T visa holder. Next slide, please. VAWA self-petitioners are not listed under Section 214 as having qualified immigration status. However, in 2016, the HUD Secretary, Julian Castro, at the time, issued a memo saying that VAWA self-petitioners have satisfactory immigration status under Section 214 because they want to place them in the same position they would have been but for the violence. Next slide, please. There is what's called the mixed status rule and housing subject to 214. And so it's the interpretation of mixed status under the HUD housing programs. So this would be, for example, the public housing programs and the Section 8 programs operated by HUD. It permits mixed status families, which include household members who are not eligible for assistance, to live together in that HUD assisted housing. That is permissible even if the only person with eligible status under Section 214 is a minor child. In that case, the rent is prorated to reflect the number of eligible persons in the household. In 2019, HUD had issued a proposed rule threatening not to allow mixed status families to live together any longer in HUD assisted housing. The Biden administration has withdrawn that rule. So the current rule that mixed status families can live together and only one person need to have eligible immigration status, including a minor child, is the current law of the land. Next slide, please. And I will say too, HUD has said they have no intention of retreating from that policy. There are other restrictions in the housing programs operated by the Rural Development Program, which is the housing programs of the USDA. And that includes the Section 514 and 516 programs, the Section 502, 504 programs, the RD voucher program, all have immigration restrictions to those programs. However, they also have a mixed status rule within RD. It operates differently than the HUD programs, though we have heard that RD may be conforming the mixed status rule to what HUD does. But the current mixed status rule for the RD housing programs is that there must be an adult household member who can be the head of household who has qualified immigration status. If that's the case, RD will not inquire about any other household member's immigration status, so the family can live together in a mixed status form as long as there's one adult household member who can be the head of household and has that qualified immigration status. If that's the case, the rent is not prorated. They take into account the income of the entire household and they give them the full subsidy as if everyone had qualified immigration status. Next slide, please. So there are a variety of federal housing programs with no immigration restrictions. Again, those are the low-income housing tax credit program, the Section 202 housing for the elderly, Section 811 housing for the disabled, the Section 221 D3 program, the Indian housing programs, HAPWA, rent rehabilitation, HOPE 2, the Section 515 and 538 programs, and the rural housing preservation grants. I have asterisks next to the Section 515 and 538 programs. That is because if you thought there were immigration restrictions on those two programs, it may be because there is guidance out of RD that has confused housing providers and advocates as to whether or not there are immigration restrictions to those programs. We believe there are not. It's clear from the statute that they are not subject to Section 214, and we are trying to advocate with RD to up their guidance and to rescind some regulations that have caused that confusion. Next slide, please. In addition to Section 214, there is the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act. The primary question under this statute is the program a federal public benefit? That determination can only be made by the federal agency administering the funds. If they have not made a determination as to whether the program is a federal public benefit, you can assume until they do that it is not. State and local governments cannot impose their own interpretation or determination. This is left exclusively to the federal agency administering the program. Even if the federal agency determines it is a federal public benefit, the funds can still be available regardless of immigration status if it's necessary for the protection of life and safety, if it's a short-term, non-cash, in-kind type of disaster relief, and I'll explain what that is with some examples, or if the program is administered by a nonprofit charitable organization. Next slide, please. Qualified status under PORA includes LPRs, refugees, asylees, immigrants paroled into the United States for a period of at least 1 year, individuals whose deportation is being withheld on a basis of persecution. Sorry, these slides. There we go. Individuals granted conditional entry pursuant to the Immigration and Nationalization Act, or Cuban and Haitian entrants. Next slide, please. Now we're going to talk about the application of PORA to certain homeless and emergency assistance funds. So if we talk first about the Emergency Solutions Grant, when we look at the Street Outreach Services, Emergency Shelter, Safe Haven, Rapid Rehousing, or transitional housing owned by the grant recipient or subrecipient, these programs are considered non-cash disaster relief, so they do not have an immigration restriction, programs necessary for the protection of life and safety. And typically, they are also programs often administered by a nonprofit charitable organization. Transitional housing, however, provided in the form of rental assistance based upon the applicant's income. So there's a determination of their income eligibility for that rental assistance, is not an exempted activity under PORA. So there would be immigration restrictions to that rental assistance program. Now looking to FEMA, most of the benefits under FEMA are considered non-cash disaster relief. Examples of that include crisis counseling and disaster legal services and other forms of short-term non-cash assistance or other non-mandatory in-kind disaster relief programs. These are also under FEMA, right? The very definition, emergency. These are programs necessary for the protection of life and safety, which would also qualify as an exception under PORA. And oftentimes these programs are administered by a nonprofit, which would be another exception under PORA. For those FEMA cash assistance programs, households with non-qualified individuals may still be eligible for the funds. What FEMA has stated is that as long as there is an eligible adult or even eligible minor child in the home, they can apply for FEMA cash assistance on behalf of the family, even if there are members of the household with non-qualified status. Next slide, please. The Community Development Block Grant Program has no immigration restrictions. And I think I saw a question maybe in the chat or even earlier about the coronavirus relief funds or the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. I think this has been a source of confusion around the country. This is a program administered by the Treasury. The Treasury doesn't typically administer emergency assistance programs. At this point, the Treasury has not issued any federal guidance imposing immigration restrictions, and they are the federal administering agency. There's also no language in the authorizing statutes for CRF or ERAP imposing an immigration restriction, whereas if you look at the full statutory text, they are imposing immigration restrictions on other programs identified in those statutes. So our position is there are no immigration restrictions on the CRF and ERAP dollars, and state and local governments are not free to impose their own. Again, the rule under PORA is that the administering federal agency has to make the determination, and until they do, it is not a federal public benefit subject to PORA. There has been litigation on this issue. There was a case filed called Poder in Action versus the city of Phoenix, Arizona. In that case, the city of Phoenix had imposed immigration requirements on their CRF dollars. There was an organization that sued to challenge that, arguing that there were no immigration restrictions imposed on CRF dollars. What the court said was, even if there were immigration restrictions under PORA, CRF fits clearly within the exceptions in PORA as non-cash disaster relief, right? These dollars are being delivered by the federal government in the midst of a pandemic, and they're meant to go to keep people sheltered and safe and healthy, and the money ultimately is going to a landlord. The home program has also raised several questions as to whether or not it is a federal public benefit. Now, HUD has not issued formal federal agency guidance as to whether or not the home program is subject to PORA as a federal public benefit. However, unfortunately, in 2004, in a brief Q&A, HUD said that it was subject to PORA as a federal public benefit. We do not believe that that's sufficient federal agency guidance. It should be official with some type of notice, not in the form of a Q&A. Even if it would be considered a federal public benefit, it should also meet several exceptions under PORA so that non-eligible immigrants are still, non-qualified immigrants are still eligible for home assistance. That includes that it's non-cash disaster relief, that it's a program necessary for the protection of life and safety, and programs administered by nonprofit charitable organizations. Next slide, please. Energy assistance dollars. This is also a big topic given rising gas prices. So under the LAHEAP program, it was determined to be a federal public benefit. However, there are exceptions as well. In weatherization programs that are offered to multi-unit rental apartment buildings, where at least 2/3 of the residents are eligible, or half of the residents are eligible in a 4-unit building, those dollars could still be applied without a determination, without excluding those households that don't have qualified status. It's also that if the LAHEAP dollars are administered by a charitable nonprofit, then it falls within that exception. And there's other LAHEAP assistance not provided directly to individuals or households based upon income eligibility, such as a cooling center, that don't have to ask questions about eligible immigration status. Next slide, please. Under ARPA, the Congress created for the first time a program to help low-income families with their water bills. So under the LWAP program, the Administration for Children and Families, in a recent FAQ, stated that it was a federal public benefit and also imposed a 5-year wait for qualified immigrants. We think that both positions are incorrect. This was a program created during a pandemic to ensure that people had access to safe and clean water. Congress explicitly tied this to the public health crisis and imposed in the statute no immigration restrictions. We're trying to reach out to HHS and the Administration for Children and Families to have this corrected. But at this point, that's what the FAQ says. However, it also says that as long as one person in the home is eligible, you can apply for the water dollars. So this is like the FEMA rule, that as long as there's one individual, either an adult or a minor in the home who has eligible immigration status, you can apply. We try to argue that even if it is a federal public benefit, it should fall within the exception under PORA as short-term non-cash disaster relief. Next slide, please. Last issue is the Federal Privacy Act and Social Security numbers. I think there's been a great deal of confusion by state and local governments and nonprofit partners who are administering the CRF and ERAP funds as to whether they can or are required to ask for Social Security numbers. Under the Federal Privacy Act, it's unlawful for any federal, state, or local governmental agency to deny an individual any right, benefit, or privilege provided by law because of an individual's refusal to disclose his Social Security account number, unless the federal agency is requiring it, and it's required by federal statute. State and local governments are not free to make this a condition of receiving the dollars. And it's important to underscore that because it has the effect, if you require a Social Security number, it has the effect of essentially imposing immigration restrictions on CRF and ERAP dollars, which we believe have no immigration restrictions. It's also important to look at other identification requirements you may have with your ERAP or CRF programs that may have the effect of creating eligibility barriers, such as a driver's license. Next slide, please. Here's my contact information. I know that was a lot. Feel free to reach out to me by email if you have any questions. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kate. Yes, a lot of information. We've got some questions already coming at you that we'll be addressing here shortly. Just a reminder to everyone, if you've got questions, keep them coming into the chat there. I'm keeping a tab on them, and we're going to address as many as we can with time allows. I'm going to do a quick stop share of slides here because we're going to switch over and prepare for our next presenters who are joining us and get their slides all queued up here. So again, very excited to have Wafa, Dinaro, and Meza joining us. And they are going to be sharing some really great examples of work that they are doing within their own communities related to a lot of the items that Kate has shared here. So I'm going to go ahead and start the slide sharing here. And believe Wafa, I am turning it over to you.
Thanks, Anthony. And thank you all for being here. Wayne County is the largest county in Michigan. We include 43 communities, including the city of Detroit. We are generally an industrial county. We have a long history of the auto industry. And because of the auto industry, because of our industrial nature, we have had a really long history of immigration. Our community is very diverse. We love that our community is very diverse, and we've made it a priority to support the diversity within our communities, to support refugees. And we are really being very specific about programming Wayne County, making all of our programs so we are a welcoming community, and we are encouraging refugees to come and resettle in our community. Next slide, please. So as Anthony introduced us, I am Wafa Dinaro. I am the Director for Economic Development. I am also an immigrant, the daughter of war refugees from Lebanon. Wayne County has a lot of people just like me. Our staff looks just like our county, just like our communities, and we are really proud of that. Luce?
Hi, everyone. My name is Meza. I am the Deputy Director for Wayne County Economic Development. I am also myself an immigrant from Mexico. I came to the US at the age of 2 and have grown up for most of my life here in Southwest Detroit in what is known as a strong Mexican American and just generally Latinx community, right next to the city of Dearborn as well, which is our strong Arab American community. I can literally go either way. There's really good Arab food just 3 blocks from me, and then you go the other way, there's delicious Mexican food as well. So this is what our community is, and what we love to showcase about us. County Executive Warren Evans has made it a point to make sure that his administration is representative of the people who live here. And what that means is that people like myself and Wafa, who have the lived experiences of working with our immigrant parents and serving our immigrant communities, know what it means to maintain inclusive programs within our county services. Next slide, please.
So like Luz kind of introduced us, refugees are a very big part of our community. We have also started an initiative called Welcoming Wayne County, where we've really been looking at the data. We've really been looking to be able to message that refugees and immigrants are great for our economy, are great for our community. We're going to play this short video just so you can see kind of the work and the data that we've collected around immigration.
Wayne County holds approximately 1.7 million residents and is home to a large population of Arab, South Asian, and Latin American residents. Among those, the top 5 countries for immigrants living in the county are Yemen, Mexico, India, Lebanon, and Bangladesh. At just 9.4% of the population, immigrants continue to have an outsized impact on the economy and tax base. This makes Wayne County Michigan's most populous and diverse county. With just over 164,000 immigrants, that's a lot. Between 2012 and 2017, the overall population in the county decreased by 2.2%. Without growth in immigrants, the decline in the county's population would have been greater, falling by 3.9%. In 2017, immigrant residents contributed $10.5 billion to the county's gross domestic product. Immigrant households earned $4.3 billion and had a total spending power of $3.2 billion after taxes. That's money spent supporting jobs and businesses in our communities. Immigrants contributed nearly $740 million to federal taxes, $345 million to state and local taxes, $430.5 million to Social Security, and $110.6 million to Medicare. In 2017, foreign-born residents made up 9.4% of the county's overall population, though they represented 10.7% of its employed labor force and 21.4% of its STEM workers. 16.3% of immigrants represent the share of entrepreneurs, compared to 6% of the US-born population. This immigrant workforce helps companies keep jobs on US soil, preserving 7,564 local manufacturing jobs that would have otherwise vanished or moved elsewhere. When it comes to education, new Americans are critical to developing an educated and highly skilled workforce. 30.4% of the county's immigrants aged 25 or older held a bachelor's degree or higher in 2017, compared to 21.7% of US-born. And 14.6% held an advanced degree, compared to 8.7%. 5,279 of these international students living as temporary residents supported 1,172 local jobs and spent $115.2 million in the 2017 to 18 academic year. It's clear, the focus towards getting a proper education benefits the county in return. Immigrants and refugees are a driving economic force in Wayne County. They create jobs, pay taxes, start businesses, and strengthen the workforce. The data is in, And the economic case is clear. A welcoming Wayne County is a stronger, more prosperous county. A welcoming America is a stronger, more prosperous America.
Okay, next slide. So when looking at specifically Wayne County, we really want to look at it holistically. We put the video together to be able to communicate the message and really get people to understand why supporting refugees is a good thing and why it benefits everybody overall. Luz, I'll kick it to you from here.
Yeah, so we have a lot of amazing partners in the landscape of this work here in Wayne County. Global Detroit is one of those amazing partners, and just a few years ago, they did publish a report on the economic impact of refugees in Southeast Michigan. I did see, by the way, a question about the video. It is available on YouTube, our Welcoming Wayne video. You could probably search it and you'll find it there. But again, you know, this data is very important to us, and this report was really significant in supporting the work that we're doing here. Next slide, please. And so the data, again, very clear. We understand that refugees in Southeast Michigan, and this is data from several years ago, but contribute somewhere between $200 and $300 million to the local economies, as well as about 1,000 to 2,000 jobs within our Southeast Michigan economy. So, you know, from the data we saw before and the data, you know, that our partners continues to publish around this, we know that continuing to support the diversity of our community was really important. Next slide.
So Wayne County is uniquely positioned to welcome immigrants and refugees. Wayne County over the last 40 years has had a declining population. And really, we see welcoming refugees as great overall. We showed you the numbers, we showed you how they impact the economy, and we see this as a way to start to bring in workers. The workforce shortage is nationwide, but is particularly troubling here in Wayne County, and we see welcoming refugees as an opportunity to grow and expand our economy. And we are really programming our funds and our assets around that idea. Next slide. So Wayne County received $32 million in emergency rental assistance. And when we were talking to some of the refugee resettlement organizations, one of the problems that they discussed at length was that the Afghani parolees don't qualify for any of the regular assistance that regular refugees coming into the country would. So we went back to our attorneys, we talked about the rental assistance program, and we realized that we could use the rental assistance program to assist incoming refugees. So we worked with the refugee resettlement organizations, and we worked out a process for them to apply on behalf of the refugees, on behalf of the parolees, to be able to pay up to 3 months of advance rent for 12 months at a time. So the way the process works is when refugees come in, refugees or parolees, the resettlement agency finds them a permanent lease. They apply through our system, and we pay the refugee resettlement organization directly 3 months of advance rent at a time. It's worked out incredibly well. The process that we've worked out is easy, is simple, and really it takes a huge burden off of the resettlement agencies on having to find funding for this rent. And we pay rent, we pay utilities, and we pay a small internet stipend for these refugees. We think it's something that could be replicated nationwide. The ERAP money, the ERAP funds have gone all over the country. Everybody has access to these funds, and we think our model is something that can and should be replicated across the country. It's a great way to assist these parolees coming in. And we are really, we're really glad that we're able to support incoming parolees as well as refugees. Next slide, please.
Again, generally, a refugee resettlement as well as immigrant inclusion is something that has been really important to us. And so the rental assistance program is only one of many programs that we've put out there in the past few years. Always keeping in mind, you know, it was brought up earlier, making sure that our application requirements are inclusive and not exclusive. So considering various forms of identification as appropriate for our programs. Another project that we completed last year and were able to start utilizing is our Hamtramck Freedom Village project. In 2020, the city of Hamtramck welcomed the first set of residents, of refugee residents that were resettled at this Freedom Village project that was funded by Wayne County, leveraging 1.2 million in federal housing dollars from HUD. The program, which built three duplexes, so 6 units of refugee housing in one of our communities, is meant to be transitional and is operated by one of our local nonprofits that supports them both with their housing needs, but also job training, school readiness, and eventually, hopefully, to help them pursue home ownership beyond this transitional housing. Next slide. And so what we were able to leverage was beneficial both for our host community of Hamtramck. You can see the before picture. We had 3 empty lots that were not being productively used in the city of Hamtramck. It was city-owned land, and we were able to repurpose this. You see these beautiful housing units that now house refugee families. Hamtramck is one of our strong immigrant communities, and those families that have been welcomed into a community that very much is inclusive and has all of the conditions there to help them meet their needs, and the support as well from our Refugee Resettlement Agency and Wayne Metro, the nonprofit operating the housing units. Next slide. And so we're looking for what's next, right? That was a pilot. We are currently working with the city of Inkster, really close to Dearborn, with this new opportunity of building upon this Freedom Village concept. We really love the project. It has been so impactful, and we want to expand this. And so currently, the county is exploring an investment in refugee housing in the city of Inkster. There's a lot of vacant city and county and state-owned land there that we're looking to bring back to productive use, to catalyze investment in the city of Inkster, but also to welcome incoming refugees. This community is really close to the airport. It's really close to other amenities and other immigrant families that we think make it an ideal place to welcome new families. Next slide. And so with that, that is, we open up for questions on our programs.
And Anthony, I saw a couple of questions. If you don't mind, while you're getting settled, I'll kind of respond to those. So one of the questions was asking about if this is open to other asylum seekers. This is open, it's open to anybody. I mean, we are putting a focus on parolees and refugees, but it is open to anybody who meets the eligibility requirements. And the eligibility requirements are, they have to make 80% below the area median income, which for refugees or asylum seekers is not really an issue. And then they can only get up to 15 months of rent in total. We are not sure that our funding is going to last for 15 months. So we are telling people 12 months because that's kind of how we're estimating that our funding will last. And as far as the source of the funding, to answer Miriam's question, this is it's all from the ARPA funds. The American Rescue Plan gave every single community emergency rental assistance funds. So every community has access to these funds. Every community has these, whether the money went directly to the counties or the money went directly to the state. every community has access to these funds.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Wafa, for jumping on those questions there. Appreciate that. Needless to say, we're getting a lot of questions. You all have provided a lot of great information here, and I appreciate it. We do have a good amount of time here left, so I want to get to as many as we possibly can. I've kind of gone back towards the beginning. Kate, I think this is a question that came up during your portion, asking if you could just expand a little bit on the term that you use, which was long-term institutionalization, and possibly give some examples of what exactly that means.
Sure, and I put the answer in the chat too. So this would be an eligible category for public charge in addition to cash assistance. So an example of long-term institutionalization under the 1999 interim field guidance will be a person who is in for the long term, a nursing facility or a psychiatric facility, but they're at the government's expense, such as reliant upon Medicaid for them to stay there. This definition may change under future rulemaking because we want to be conscious of the fact that this could be an issue for persons with disabilities, and we don't want immigrant with disabilities to be excluded from remaining in the United States. So I think it's an evolving definition, but under the current 1999 field guidance, that's what you can use as the definition for long-term institutionalization.
Excellent. Thanks so much for that. Wafa and Luz, if you want to, any of you, jump in at any point with any of these questions, definitely feel free to. One question that I saw that just came up, Wafa and Luz, in terms of what you presented with what you're doing with your programs there locally. Is there anywhere where people can go, like to your website or somewhere, to kind of see some examples of this referenced, something that they can hopefully touch on and see about trying to replicate in their own communities?
So there isn't anything on our website, just because this was initially a pilot and it's something that we're growing, but we absolutely can share information. We can send it to you and you can send it out to the group.
Perfect. That sounds great. Thank you. You're getting a lot of interest, so that'll be perfect. There was also a question, and again, I believe, Kate, this may have been in your portion, in terms of all of the different programs and such. Is there any sort of a limit to income that impacts the receipt of any of the benefits?
Most of the programs have some sort of income eligibility requirement. It's going to vary by program. So you have to look at each particular program to see if there's income targeting. Some of the programs that I described, like LAHEAP, there are parts of LAHEAP that don't have an income restriction. So if there's a heat wave, anyone going to a cooling center, they're not asking how much you make on an annual basis to enter. But if there's some form of direct assistance like rental assistance or cash assistance, there typically is.
Excellent. Thanks so much there. Another question that has come in that I think would be a good one, and probably several have touched on in various ways here, but can any of you kind of share maybe some sort of strategies, best practices that not only help families, but also local agencies navigate all of these complex requirements for the different programs? Anything that you've seen kind of in place or best practices? Tough one.
I'll just say that I know I'm working with a program in Baltimore, and I think the success of that program, where they want to create affordable housing for undocumented families, is that they're working with a variety of private partners and state and local partners, and then looking at each source of funding, determining if there are any immigration restrictions, and then building housing around this ideal of creating housing that would have no immigration requirements. So part of that is starting with the tax credit program, if you're doing site-based affordable housing, and then building out from there.
Thanks so much, Kate. Appreciate that. Question here that I'm going to direct, it's probably rightfully so, to Wafa and Luz here. So referencing back to the summer when there were a lot of bad floods in the Michigan area, in terms of disaster relief and the challenge of just kind of getting the word out there quickly and clearly about what FEMA had available and how people were eligible for that. Can you give any examples of communities that were able to do that and how they went about doing that effectively?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and I will say we thought really long and hard about this because we understand it's difficult for undocumented to apply for these programs, and we, as a county, we ended up creating our own program to kind of fill some of these gaps. While we encouraged everybody to apply for FEMA funding, we also were very mindful that not everybody is comfortable applying to the federal government and giving out their information to the federal government. We created a program for flood assistance where we covered a lot of the costs that FEMA doesn't cover. So we covered, carpets and personal items and, washers and dryers and things that FEMA specifically doesn't cover. But with all of our programming, we're always very mindful. We never ask for social security numbers. We're very conscious about the information we're requesting. And we are very, we always have the undocumented in mind when we're building out our programs. So I don't know if that really answered the question. We did encourage folks to apply for FEMA. It's very difficult to communicate that in a disaster, but we're also mindful, and we ended up creating our own program as well.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing that. I appreciate it. Let's see here. I know we're coming up on time, so I definitely want to stay aware of that. Acknowledging receipt of that question. So Wafa, I think you did kind of hit the target there. So thank you for that. I think we have hit most of these. We've got some people saying they've got to drop. So again, I want to stay aware of everyone's time and respect that. If we weren't able to get to your question, we will do our best to follow up post-webinar. Again, I want to stay conscious of time here. So please hang tight for that. Again, Wafa, Kate, Luz, thank you all so much for sharing all of this great information today. It's been a real pleasure working with all of you through this process and just seeing it all come together. So I thank you all very much for that. As a reminder to everyone, again, we are recording this. Everyone referenced some different resources. So we will follow up with you. You're going to get a copy of the recording as well as a link or the links to all of the resources that were referenced here. So look for that coming out in the next few days. If you have any specific questions about this webinar or webinars in general, any other events that we're putting on, feel free to reach out to me. Best is to send me an email to events@welcomingamerica.org. And if you don't already do so, please follow us on our social media channels. You can also subscribe to YouTube and LinkedIn and follow us there to stay up to date on everything that we are putting out in terms of programs and opportunities. So thank you all again for sharing this time with us today. We really appreciate it. Again, a big thank you to our speakers. And on behalf of everyone at Welcoming America, I want to wish all of you the happiest of holidays. And we look forward to seeing you all again in the new year in 2022. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you again.
Bye. Thank you.